For me, this is an absolute joy on multiple levels. My name is Jan Katzew, and I have uh, a long-standing relationship with Westchester Reformed Temple. My spouse and I, Lainey and I, Cantor Lainey Katzew and I, and our children were members of WRT for many years when we lived in New Rochelle, New York. Subsequently, uh, we moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I served on the faculty at Hebrew Union College, from which I retired just about a year and a half ago, at the end of June in 23. And Lainey and I now have our primary residence on Cape Cod. Although, as one of you already asked, we do spend a significant amount of time in Israel because one of our children, Kara, who was actually confirmed at at WRT, uh, is now married, has lived in Israel for 13 years, and had two children. Um, uh, One is named Liam, he is about 2.5 years old now, and uh, a an almost 3-month old child named Ariel, who was born on October 7th, 2024.
Oh,
And there are lots of stories, I assure you, that if you wish, we'll regale you with them, relating to the context for that birth. Nonetheless, I will sum it up by saying, in some respects, it's the ultimate act of faith and defiance to assert life again on a day that is associated with tremendous tragedy and pain. Just one more sentence in terms of the joy it is, in addition to connecting or reconnecting with dear people at Westchester Reformed Temple, is the joy of co-facilitating these sessions, these 4 sessions, with a newer friend and colleague, Noam, who will introduce himself in a moment, and I are a team. And we're a team not only in this context, we have been colleagues and mentor mentee, and sometimes he's mentor and I'm mentee, and sometimes I'm mentor and he's mentee in the context of a wonderful project uh, uh, from the Jewish Education Project that has matched senior educators, which means basically people with white hair and people who are currently in the field. And I have absolutely loved the opportunity to learn with, to learn from, and to learn about Noam. Please, if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So, my name is Noam Vinokor-Meindrath. I think, as you can probably tell from my accent, I was born and raised in Israel. And I have been living in the States for 9 years, almost 9 years now. Uh, I've been uh, I've been working at Westchester Reform Temple in the Jewish Learning Lab for this is my third year. I am a Jewish educator. I have a BA in Jewish thought and an MA in Jewish studies. And it's always been really important for me to try and bridge the two largest communities, largest Jewish communities in the world right now, which is the Israeli community and the Jewish community. So I'm very excited to start this opportunity. As so, and as I said, I've been living in Westchester for 4 years now. I live with my wife, our two sons, Omer, who is 2.5 years old, and Lior, who is our newest addition to the family, and he is 3 weeks old.
oh
And
my God.
he had his bliss at WRT, and yeah, and I give Rabbi Katzew that really it is maybe our obligation and our challenge to keep the light. The O means my light. Keep the light in the world at this time, and bring up the next generation. So that's it. And I want to see Rabbi Black. Do you want to say a few words?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov, and Happy New Year. And to my friends Noam and Jan, Rabbi Katzew and Noam, so good to have you with us. Thank you for the initiative to teach this mini-mester. When I was in college, in addition to the standard semester format of a fall learning term and a spring learning term, Amherst had, and I believe still has, a winter interterm or winter term, which would be 4 weeks of material that you could audit. You wouldn't get course credit for it, but many students would stay behind just to learn on campus. So here we are. This is our winter term, and we actually have 3 4-week sessions coming up. Somebody should just mute oneself. I'm not sure who it is, but there's some noise coming from someone's channel. I don't have the ability to mute for you, but if you would just take a moment, and everybody else who's not speaking, just mute yourself because somebody has a television on in the background. Thank you.
I'm just going to mute everyone except for the 3 of us. Oh, I muted you, sorry. Yeah, Rabbi Black, please unmute yourself. And
no problem. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So that's something, if you're new or unpracticed with Zoom, you have to control the environmental sound. Hi. Anyway, it's a delight to be with my friends and colleagues and with fellow learners. Whenever possible, I look forward to joining this class and being a learner, because good rabbis are good learners and good learners make good rabbis. So just wanted to say welcome, and could not imagine a more meaningful or timely topic of discussion. So grateful to have everyone here, and especially my colleagues.
Thank you. We did, Noam and I, want always to recognize where we are now. For some people, and I just came from a session with about 50 people in Jewish education, and for some people, it's still October 7th. So we thought that we would open with a prayer that we will recite. You should see it here, I hope, in Hebrew, in transliteration, and in translation. So owing to the fact that this is a course that is built around Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the Declaration of Israel's independence, we invite you again, if you'll be kind enough to remain on mute, to recite first in Hebrew and then in English translation this prayer, Achenu. Achenu, Kol Beit Yisrael.
Sorry, Rabbi Katzew, before we start, I just want to point out
yes.
one hostage family that got the worst news yesterday, which is the El Ziadana family, who up until yesterday, it was thought that the 2 family members, Yusuf and Hamza, were alive. Yusuf's body was found yesterday, and Hamza, there's evidence at the scene that shows great concern for Hamza's well-being. When I was in Israel in the summer with a delegation of Jewish educators, and we happened to meet with a relative of the family. So it's been the family that's been especially important to me, and so it is one of the families of hostages who are Israeli but are not Jewish. They're Bedouin Muslims. So I do want to say we're thinking of all remaining 99 hostages, but I'm especially thinking of that family this week.
Thank you. Noam, why don't you lead us?
I'm going to say, okay. אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם עליהם, ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה לאורה, ומשעבוד לגאולה. השתה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ונאמר, Amen.
Our brothers, the whole house of Israel, who are in distress and captivity, who wander over sea and over land, may God have mercy on them and bring them from distress to comfort, from darkness to light, from slavery to redemption, now, swiftly, and soon, as together we say, Amen.
So when we start, we all have already asked about what could be in a Declaration of Independence, and Sandra has written that foundational reasons for creation of the country and rights, like a Bill of Rights and voting. And we want to ask a similar question, which is, why do we even need? Why does the country need a Declaration of Independence? And we'd like to open it up to you. You can either raise your hand or write it in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable. Well, so what message? The question, the chat question is, why does a country need a Declaration of Independence? Yes, Russell.
Well, I suppose independence does not gain its whole meaning unless the rest of the world acknowledges that and treats it as an independent body politic. And so, a Declaration of Independence makes known the people's identity as a nation and invites them to be treated as such in the international order.
Thank you.
And in the chat, Sandra has written, express to citizens and outsiders in the world the foundational identity and laws of the country. I think it's an opportunity also to articulate a vision. What's our why? What is our purpose? What's our raison d'etre, our justification for being?
Yeah, and Sandra also added that constitutionally it has the force of law, which is correct, and we will talk about it later in the course.
We undoubtedly, over the course of the next several sessions, will return to this foundational question. We would love to know, as you briefly would be willing to introduce yourselves, what questions you come with, why it might be that you chose to be part of this conversation and focus in particular on Israel's Declaration of Independence. Judith.
I think it's not only to establish the position among others, among the world, but also to lay down certain principles that the entity itself wants to live by.
Thank you.
We
Yes.
have.
Go ahead.
I have, and I think it's interesting to think about. I have done things, I did things for people who are getting married, and I have copied the Declaration of Independence and used the words of the United States Declaration to say why the two people are interdependent. So I think it's just it's sort of, it's the other side and yet not so much. But for instance, as we hold these truths to be self-evident that Maya and Sadu are created equal, that they are endowed by their parents with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then as free and independent people, they could do certain things. But life, liberty, and happiness is essential. It's very general, but it's meaningful.
Actually, that's beautiful that you raised that. We are going to come back to recognizing that the formal final declaration of Israel's independence is actually the fifth draft. These drafts were written very hastily over the course of just 3 weeks, really between Passover and the actual declaration, the 5th of Iyar in 1948. And during that period of time, one of the documents in particular that influenced the very first of the drafts was the American Declaration of Independence, or in your beautiful contextualization of interdependence. Would you be kind enough, I think we would really love it if everyone who is here would introduce themselves and indicate something of either a question that you have or why it is you chose to be part of this learning environment and to focus on Israel's Declaration of Independence. Judith, would you be kind enough to begin and just kind of briefly
Sure.
introduce? Okay.
I'm Judy Gross, starting with anything that Rabbi Blake teaches, I want to be a student right there. And my husband, who actually his yard site is this month, was part of the group that met to study Torah and study Talmud. And it's anything that enhances my learning of Judaism, anything Jewish, enriches me as a Jewish person. And that's basically it. And happy to be here. You have a reputation of being another wonderful teacher. So as I say to my kids, if it's a good teacher, it doesn't matter what the course is, take it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and Sandra is raising her hand.
Sandra? You need to unmute.
Thank you. I too I'll take anything that the rabbi and now our Rabbi Katzew and your colleagues teaches. I love learning, and I find that it's only through the temple that I do. And also about Israel, I just have the idea that it's our country, that it's from the Torah and so on, but I don't really know very much about it, and that it was established by mandate in Britain, but from Britain in that case. But I don't know anything really, and so if we as Jewish people identify so much with Israel and support it, this is very valuable instruction.
Thank you. All right. Russell and then Judy.
Hello, I'm Russell De Silva, and I, well, like everyone else, of course, I will study anything that Rabbi Blake is involved with, but I also have the privilege of studying with Rabbi Katzew in Torah study when you were part of WRT, and I was very eager to participate in this, to have the pleasure of learning from you again. The subject is, like everyone else, is something I know very little about. I love to learn, and I also love to be an annoyance to everybody else. So that's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Judy.
Yes, I'm Judy Lass. That's my maiden name because it's my email. I am taking a course because I'm very fascinated In 1961, I took a course with Rabbi Katzew at NYU, and I thought it's time to sort of go back and try to find other interesting aspects of the idea of Israel becoming a nation. And I'm a former history professor and teacher. And I think under the circumstances of what we're living through today, it's very important to find out more material that we need to know in order to make Israel, better in some respects and to make the world a better place, I think, in the measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra.
You need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Oh, Sandra, you need to unmute yourself, please. Sandra Older.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize my hand was raised.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. Well, she's Sandra. I'm Sandra.
Yes.
I am thrilled to take this class with Rabbi Katzew. I've been Torah studying other things with him. I think that one of the things is that about the Declaration of Independence, since Israel doesn't have a constitution, the Declaration of Independence sort of sets them apart as a country, allows them to enter into treaties with other countries, to establish an army, and a lot of things that make a country separate and sovereign. And from far as I know, Israel still doesn't have any kind of a constitution. So that really is the background, the governing document of Israel.
Beautiful. Thank you. Trish.
Hello.
Hi.
Partially, I want to say it's muscle memory. It's Thursday at 10:15, so I expect to be on Zoom studying. So this time it just happens to be with you, which is a lovely circumstance. You and your cohort there. I'm interested in this area of study because I'm very interested to see how this historic event was framed in a document. Because the only other Declaration of Independence I've ever read is the American one with very different circumstances. So I'm interested to see how they didn't have to declare that they were separating themselves from another nation like we did. Interesting to see how they phrased it and what important ideas they thought needed to be in this document.
Beautiful. Thank you. Barbara. Can you unmute yourself? Perfect.
I'm sorry, my internet is very unstable. That's why I haven't joined. Hope you can hear me. I'm a faculty at WRT. I have been for a couple of years, through to our students online. I'm a lifelong learner. The Talmud classes for years, and I have a very long background in Israel, but I don't know the I just love to learn.
Great. Well, all of you are most welcome. Let's see, George.
I would like to second the words of Russell, because he expressed my thoughts. I'm an occasional attendee at the Shabbos Torah study, and remember Rabbi Katzew being there and always impressed with his comments. And this is a topic that I had not seen before. It's a new subject for me. And when I saw that Rabbi Katzew would be one of those leading the discussion, I felt that I'd like to spend some time to learn some more. And so it's nice to see you again, Rabbi, and to see all of you.
Well, it's a pleasure, as we already indicated, to learn with you again and from you again, and to do so with someone with Noam, who has really become a friend and a colleague. I want to point out that it's not incidental or accidental that there's somebody, myself, who was born in America, and somebody, Noam, who was born in Israel. My hope and expectation is that over the course of these 4 sessions, you will hear appropriately different perspectives. I have never, other than during periods of time in which I was a student in Israel, I'm not an Israeli citizen, and I think it'll be important for there to be, in addition to the documents that we're going to be sharing, a humanization, a personalization of what the Israel's Declaration of Independence still means to this very day, in the context of aspirations, just like the American Declaration of Independence. It's not descriptive. These are aspirational documents. And I think it's important to distinguish between an ideal state and a state of ideals. A Declaration of Independence articulates the ideals of the state. And sometimes we forget that Israel is not an ideal state. It never has been an ideal state. Just like, in a sense, the words United States are not descriptive. The United States have never been united. And in the same way, I think it'll be important to distinguish what are the ideals that led to the founding of the state, which of those ideals are still aspirational, and which of them, in some sense, have already been realized. What I think we'd like to do now is take us back from 2025 now, I almost said 2024, to 1948, and to bring us back in particular to a place in Tel Aviv, not the biggest hall, because they were afraid in May of 1948 that if it was public, that it was likely to be bombed. So this was done very hastily and to an extent surreptitiously, that people were brought to Rothschild House in Tel Aviv, where the following declaration was read by David Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion, who, of course, we will come back to. Noam?
Yeah, and we're gonna just highlight this first document from the day before, May 13 of 1948. Is an invitation to one of the few people who were invited to participate to witness the reading and signing of the Declaration of Independence. And dear sir, we are honored hereby to send an invitation to the session of the Declaration of Independence in the hall of the museum, 16 Rothschild Boulevard, which was then the site of the Tel Aviv Museum. We ask you to keep confidential the contents of the invitation, location, and time of assembly. So, as Rabbi Katzew said, it was important to keep this secret. It was known that the mandate is ending, that there will be a Declaration of Independence, but the exact place and time was kept secret. So let's see a picture. This is from outside at the time. So remember, it's a secret. So only these many people apparently knew about it together outside. Right? It's really, we're starting to see how good Israel is going to be at keeping secrets, which military-wise, very good. Street-wise, not very good. But this is outside. We're gonna see a short video of what it looks like inside. Let me just make sure that I'm sharing sound. I am. Okay, so let's see.
באייר תש"ח, 14 במאי 1948, אחר הצהריים, באו המוזמנים אל בניין מוזיאון תל אביב, מסגרות רוטשילד 16. הם התבקשו לשמור את סיבת ההזמנה, טקס הכרזת העצמאות, לסוד. אבל בבואם מצאו את חצי העיר ממתינה להם. סמוך לשעה 4 הגיע דוד בן גוריון. כל חייו היו מסע אל הרגע הזה.
זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי, להיות כוחות עם ועם, עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית, אשר יפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי, ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו אנו חברי מועצת העם ונציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. מתוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת 10 האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. ישראל הננו חותמים בסתימת ידינו לעדות על הכרזה זו.
And I do want to take a look at the actual official document. On the left, we can still look at the entire document. On the right, a highlight of actually the part we'll be learning today. And just looking at it, invite whoever wants to unmute and quickly answer the question, what visually does it look like? What does this remind you of?
The Torah.
Torah. Yeah, that's of course on purpose. It was done as a Torah scroll on parchment, initially by a sofer that they did it like the version the sofer did, and they hired a calligraphist. But yeah, it's on purpose designed to look like a Torah scroll. And in Hebrew, actually, the name of this is not Declaration of Independence, Hachrazat Ha'atzmaut. It's Megillat Ha'atzmaut. It's the scroll of independence. So that is on the one hand. On the other hand, as Rabbi Katzew said, there were a lot of drafts, and in fact, they didn't settle on the final wording until just a few hours before the actual declaration. So they did not have time to really set out this document. So the document we actually saw Ben Gurion holding was a typewritten piece of paper with the text that they glued onto a piece of parchment. So it will look like he's reading from a scroll, like a Torah scroll, but it's in fact typewritten. That is except for this last part, the bottom part, which includes the signatures, and they basically just signed an empty piece of parchment, and somebody else later wrote, added everything. So again, we're seeing just the beginning of the state, and there's a lot to be said about Israelis deciding things and doing things on the fly in this way. But yes, so we're gonna take a look, and I'm going to share. Let's stop sharing the screen. I am going to share in the chat. I'm putting on a file with our with our source sheet for today, which I'll also put on the screen.
I think it may also be interesting to note. Oops, I'm hearing my echo. It may be interesting to know that spontaneously, upon reciting this declaration, there was two expressions. One was the Shehechianu, and the other was spontaneously singing Hatikva. Now, Hatikva didn't become the national anthem of the state of Israel until 2004. But as some of you may know, Hatikva was something that kind of transcended the state of Israel. It was written long before the state of Israel, and as a consequence of its kind of visceral association, you can perhaps imagine that crowd that Noam showed us that had assembled outside this, quote, secret meeting was also made up of different kinds of Jews, different kinds of Zionists, those that were explicitly religious, that understood this to be a profound event in the history of Judaism, and others who primarily saw it as an event that was political, an event that was really the recreation or the solidification of the Jewish people. And so it was important to have both the religious expression of Shehechianu, of invoking God, who is not explicitly mentioned, as we will see in the Declaration of Independence, and at the same time to say, yes, we are a people and our hope is being realized before our eyes, our 2,000-year-old hope of returning to this land, and our connection of the people to the land is being reasserted.
Yes. So the way this course is going to work, we're going to focus on a section each time. And a little like the Talmud, we're going to start with the whole session, just like the Talmud starts with a Mishnah, and then we'll break it down and talk about each part. So as I'm reading this first three paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence, I'm going to ask you to think about how they're phrasing this here and what events are described as happening in the land of Israel, what events are described as happening outside the land of Israel. So, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel or Palestine, was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained to statehood, created cultural values of natural and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for the return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. Impelled by this historic and traditional attachment, Jews strove in every successive generation to re-establish themselves in their ancient homeland. In recent decades, they returned in their masses, pioneers, ma'apilim, which were immigrants illegal immigrants, basically, and defenders. They made deserts bloom, revived the Hebrew language, built villages and towns, and created a thriving community, controlling its own economy and culture, loving peace and knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all the country's inhabitants, and aspiring towards independent nation. Okay, so, and again, just whoever feels compelled to can unmute and tell us what sort of things we see happening in the land of Israel in this document.
Can you scroll back to the beginning of the first paragraph?
Yes.
Please. I think my suggestion would be to use the same skills that you bring. I know you just have been involved in Talmud study. So whatever skills and techniques that you would utilize then, with Talmud, this is a text which I think can be understood and interpreted in the same way. To state the obvious, there is something quite profound about the fact that the original of this text is in Hebrew. And there are some people even to this day who would say that perhaps the most significant act of the state of Israel has been to really revivify, bring back to life the Hebrew language, and to have created this document in a living Hebrew language in and of itself was quite a tremendous feat. But so are there people who are ready now to take a look even at the first paragraph of what is written in the Declaration of the Establishment of the State of Israel about something that took place in the land of Israel according to this document?
Birth.
Birth. Now, is that true? To the best of your knowledge, the land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Is that true? To whatever it is you've read? Well, it's certainly quite controversial, put it that way. Because
let's look at the sources we have about this question. So we're going to focus on just this false statement. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. And yeah.
So one possibility that we learn in the Bible is that the Jewish, first of all, they're not yet a people, but in some sense, the connection between the land of Israel and arguably the first Jew is Vayomer Adonai el Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave your land and go from your father's house to the land that I will show you. So this is an individual, not yet a people, of course, and he's not yet even Abraham. So there's a huge question about whether this initial claim, and by the way, this was added, as Noam already indicated, the night before the declaration. This was not in the declaration prior to Ben-Gurion adding it just a matter of hours before it was made, that the land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. It's also possible that Egypt was the birthplace of the Jewish people, or that Sinai, which was not part of Israel, was the birthplace of the Jewish people. I mean, some of you probably have been at a bar bat mitzvah at WRT, and it might be the case that the family, the grandparents and the great-grandparents and the aunts and the uncles and the brothers and the sisters and the parents of the person becoming bar bat mitzvah is ready to accept the Torah. And they accept the Torah very often in many congregations with somebody saying, and the Torah was given at Sinai from Moses to Joshua to the elders, to the men of to the people of the great Sanhedrin. Well, Moses never made it to Israel. So wait a minute. Where was the birthplace of the people of Israel? So right from the outset, Ben-Gurion is making a statement that is not necessarily in coherence with Jewish tradition, and doing so knowingly. Yes, Russell.
Well, for an American reader, it's very hard not to compare this to the U.S. Declaration of Independence. And the U.S. Declaration of Independence begins with a catalog of atrocities committed by the British, and specifically the meaning of what it is to be a tyrant. The terrible thing and unjust things that the tyrant has done. And the U.S. Declaration of Independence, I believe, utilizes three rationalizations, and they're rationalization, giving a justification or a rationale for why we are making this declaration. The first, of course, and the longest is the atrocities that the King of England had committed against the American people. But and the second is a concept of natural law, droit naturel, a concept that was very much in fashion in late 18th century European thinking, and to all of us lawyers on the phone, has almost never appeared again in U.S. constitutional history or constitutional law. In fact, as lawyers, whenever we read a brief in which someone appeals to natural law, it usually means they have no other argument. But the third, and I think most fascinating, rationale for independence that appears in the U.S. Declaration of Independence is basically because we said so. Free and ought to be, and we hold. We're free because we say we're free. We elect. That's the beginning and end of the analysis. And I wonder whether, from what little I have seen in these last few minutes of the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it was kind of it's basically saying, how great we are and all that, but it is kind of missing that rationale of why we deserve this. What is the basis? What is the authority in which we're doing it? Unlike the U.S. Declaration of Independence, it doesn't refer to God. So this opening paragraph is essentially saying we belong here because, this is where we are returning to our birthright. The fact that it may not be entirely factually true, I don't know how much of the U.S. Declaration of Independence was factually true either, or at least exaggerated. So, as I said, I'm here to annoy everybody else, so I will discontinue.
Well, you haven't succeeded in annoying me at all, so you'll have to try much harder on that score. But I think you are at least from my perspective, and then I'll defer to Noam, I think you're making a very salient point that we will see uncovered and expressed in other elements of this foundational document that have repercussions and echoes to this very day. That there is a sense, quite frankly, of reclaiming a position in power history. We have been victims for too long. We are ready now to tell our story and own it. And we are not going to be any longer objects of history. We are going to be subjects of history. We are re-entering power history in which we are reclaiming our sovereignty and our connection to this land. And, this, as I said, there are adumbrations, this foreshadowed some of what we are experiencing right at this very moment. I'm going to digress for one moment, and then I'm going to defer to Noam. Rabbi Blake knows that just a couple of weeks ago, we were in New Zealand. Lainey and I went to New Zealand on an amazing trip, and we had the following experience. We were taken to what, if we were in Israel, I would have called a tell, a little archaeological site. In this case, it was by the 3 Maori young women, all in their 20s, maybe 30s. And they were phenomenal. They brought this place back to life. They were explaining their connection to this land, their history, and with great joy and pleasure, and trying to have all of us appreciate their profound connection to their culture, to their ancestry, and their joy in being able to connect us to their experience. And as we were about finished with this hour or hour and a half long tour, I said, I really want to thank you, not only for your knowledge, not only for what you've expressed about what happened in this place, but also your very clear love for this land and your connection to it. And right at that moment, the woman who was leading us sort of beamed and said, oh, thank you, that's exactly what we're hoping to do. And then she continued to say, and as an indigenous people, the Maori, that is why one of the things that we do when we're not here is participate in pro-Palestinian rallies and protests that are taking place in New Zealand. Now, at this point, Laney and I were with a group of people. The group looked at me like, oh, Rabbi, we know you're a rabbi. You're going to get into a debate with these, young women. I decided, no, I'm not going to do that. But 3 minutes later, because we were just about done with the tour, the three women came up to me and they said, would you do us a favor? And I said, perhaps. And they said, well, what we'd like you to do is a short video saying what you said publicly, because with the new conservative government in New Zealand, it's quite possible that our funding is going to be cut and we're not going to be able to do these tours anymore. And I said, yes, I will. However, I want you, since you've introduced yourself, I want to introduce myself. I'm a rabbi. We have family in Israel. Our children and grandchildren live in Israel. We have nieces and nephews and cousins and brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and I've led many trips to Israel. And they stopped me and they said, oh my gosh, we offended you. And I said, actually, you didn't offend me, but you spoke your truth. Now my question to you is, are you ready to hear my truth? They said yes. And we spoke for several minutes. And then I asked them if they would be willing to read a book. They said yes, and I arranged to get them Noah Tishby's book, if you haven't come across it. It's a book really directed at people of their age cohort, at people in their 20s and 30s, about, this incredibly complicated place called Israel. Now, I digressed, hopefully not inappropriately, because I think that one of the things that is most important about understanding what is beneath the Declaration of Israel's independence is a reclaiming of our story. That this was not born, Zionism was not born in the 20th century or in the 19th century, at least not of the common era, but maybe 3,000 or more years ago, that we lay claim legitimately to this place. And Ben-Gurion, by saying this was the birthplace of our people, is immediately taking Zionism long before Theodor Herzl, long before Ahad Ha'am, and saying, this is something which people need to know. And my hope and prayer is that not just each of us, but more and more people who are Jewish know this story, so that we can also, whether it's with the Maori in the middle of nowhere, New Zealand, or quite frankly, people who are studying settler colonialism, if you have children or grandchildren who are studying at some of the best universities in the world, they're not learning this. And I realize that part of me is getting all emotional inside, because for me, this is not just speaking from my head. This is a lot from my heart. And I hope that some of that is able to come through in the Zoom room. Noam.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And it was a really interesting story. I did see a message asking if we can go back to just the text of the declaration. So we are going to go back and forth between the declaration and sources that we think are relevant. But I did just put the link to the full declaration if anyone wants to see. I think you've gotten that link by email before. But you can follow along with the declaration. And I will encourage you to look at some of these sources that we're skipping, talking about some of this tension. Why was the Torah given in the desert and not in the land of Israel? So we're going to see the next paragraph. Here the Jewish people created cultural values of national and universal significance and gave to the world the eternal book of books. And again, there's a choice here. The book of books, of course, is the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. And there's a choice here to not to only emphasize the cultural values, the cultural creations of the Jewish people from the land of Israel, such as the Tanakh, and not mention, for example, the Babylonian Talmud, which is a huge influence on Jewish culture and was created outside the land of Israel. The next part, after being forcibly exiled from the land. And I think when we all think, and this is one of the maybe parts that we are narratively might have a little bit of a problem here, or a little bit of a wrinkle to the story, because a lot of us think of it this way, that there was a Jewish state, it was destroyed by the Romans in the destruction of the Second Temple, and the Jews were sent away. The reality is a little bit more complicated, because we go back to the end of the First Temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians, and then the entire population was exiled, until 70 years later, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, allowed the Jews to come back. So the wrinkle there is that while a lot of Jews came back to Israel, a lot of Jews chose not to. And already while the second temple was around, there was the beginning of a global Jewish population. And we have some sources that, again, I'm going to go very briefly, talking about this population. And one of them is from the Roman orator Cicero, who mentions given as gold under pretense of being given to the Jews was accustomed every year to be exported out of Italy and all the provinces to Jerusalem. So these Jews that are living in Rome and somewhere in the Roman Empire are selling gold to Jerusalem. So this is part of, we do see they live outside the state of Israel, the land of Israel, but they do have the connection, partly by giving money to Jerusalem, presumably to the temple. And Cicero disapproves of it because he thinks only the Roman state is supposed to collect gold and taxes. We also have another description by Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jew living in Alexandria at the time of the Second Temple, describing people coming to the temple for pilgrimage during the holidays, during the free pilgrimage holidays, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot, from all over the world. From the description here, some people speculate that Philo himself may have made pilgrimage to the temple. It's unclear, but it is clear that Philo was part of a very vibrant Jewish community in Alexandria. And finally, we actually have an interesting text from the New Testament, from the book of Acts, talking about what the apostles of Jesus did after his death and resurrection. And there is a description of them coming to the temple in Shavuot. So Jesus was crucified on Passover, so this is 50 days later for Shavuot. And they're talking to all the people, and miraculously, every person there hears their word in their native tongue. And in here, the part I highlighted, we actually have a list of where so many people came from. And this is our most comprehensive list of where Jews came from in the days of the Second Temple. Now, we should say the book of Acts was written probably around 85 of the Common Era, so about 10 to 15 years after the destruction of the temple. But still, we have this list that most scholars think is credible of where Jews lived during the time of the temple. Now, we're going back to the declaration. After being forcibly exiled from their land, which we see is more complicated. There were Jews living outside of the land before. And after the exile, after the destruction of the temple, there were still a lot of Jews that remained in the land of Israel. And for example, wrote the Mishnah. And later the Jerusalem Talmud. And in fact, from the time of the destruction until the establishment of the state of Israel, there's no one point in history where there are no Jews living in the land of Israel. There always have been still some Jews living in Israel. So the people kept faith with the land, throughout the dispersion, never ceased to pray and hope for the return and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. And if you can write to us maybe in the chat, Where do you think in our tradition, where do we have this hope for return to Israel? Where do we see that? So Joanne is mentioning the Haggadah, which of course ends with next year in Jerusalem.
What?
Does everybody know where in the Haggadah that I guess Joanne and Noam are referring to, where Jerusalem comes in?
At the end.
Yes, exactly. Right at the very end. A rebuilt Jerusalem. So the Exodus, freedom from leads to freedom to. Freedom from Egypt leads to freedom to the land of promise.
This may have already been noted, but I just want to point out that the language, both in Hebrew, though you get it in the English too, and I'm curious about who did the officially, the official translation into English and other languages, but the Hebrew seems consciously poetic. And draws on phrases that would not be part of conversational language in modern Hebrew, even in 1948. So, for instance, the word forcibly exiled, it says, Shugla me'arzo bechoach hazro'ah, which literally means with a strong arm, which is normally a phrase rendered as a kind of poetic way of praising God. But here it's been inverted it's the strong arm, presumably, of the enemy who forced the Jews out of their homeland into exile. But whoever wrote it that way, it's a very deliberate choice of language to express, this is so much more than a legal document. It was written with an intentionally literary aim, though how and why that decision was made and who is responsible for its authorship, I'm here as a learner. I don't know the answer to those questions.
Well, I can begin to respond. It's a very cogent recognition. One of the many things that Ben Gurion did the last night, apparently before the declaration was made in one of the 14th of May in 48, and it was pretty late. Shabbat was about to come in, actually, as this was occurring. The prior version had been written by his original name was Moshe Sharet, foreign minister. And he, in many respects, in paying homage to the American Declaration, had a lot of whereases and all kinds of connective tissue, as it were. He eliminated it. Ben Gurion eliminated all of that in quite consciously. But what he did keep was from a version of the Declaration. There, as I think I said, maybe all too briefly, there were 5 different drafts. The first one was by somebody named Mordechai Behem, who was sort of a junior attorney, quite frankly, at a law firm. And he was the one who focused an awful lot on the American Declaration of Independence and natural rights and historical rights, et cetera, came through. And then somebody named Tzvi Berenson, who was a labor Zionist, had a lot of the phrases connected explicitly to the land. And then the third person was Herschel Lauderpacht, and he had an explicitly religious ritual background. And supposedly, these were some of the phrases that harkened back to it, being able to read them as though you were a religious Jew in one way, and a secular Jew, you could read them in another way. There's a myth that we will get to about the last phrase in the document, in the Declaration of Independence, that somehow at the very last minute somebody came up with a phrase that would, so to speak, please both the religionists and the secularists. And actually, we now know that it was a phrase that was in the very first of the drafts. But we'll come to that when we get to the very end of the document. But thank you for that insightful comment, because this document is somewhat of a pastiche or a puzzle that's been put together. And then the final puzzle maker was David Ben-Gurion. But this is, to me, that one of the things that's very hopeful about this document is that it's proof that people who had almost diametrically opposed perspectives on Zionism could actually agree on something and sign on to something. It may, in 76 years, it's been pretty darn rare that all, the Knesset basically came together and was able to sign this. Anyway, thank you for your insights.
Yeah, and these are all of the themes that we'll be touching on the next few sessions. We will see a little bit of how Jews thought of the land of Israel in exile. And we actually have two examples from the original Babylonian exile. And one of them is on the rivers of Babylon, which you may know, the musical versions by either Bonnie M, which was a cover of a reggae song, or of Peter, Paul, and Mary. But one of the things that we say, by the rivers of Babylon, we said we wept and we thought of Zion. But another significant part is, our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. How could we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? So in a way, it's incomprehensible to whoever wrote this to even have any kind of Jewish or any kind of prayer or Jewish culture outside the land of Israel. And followed by, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue stick to my palate. If I cease to think of you, if I not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour. These are words that ended up making it into the wedding ritual. This is something that traditionally the groom would say just before smashing the glass, which itself is a symbol of destruction. So this is another way in which the memory of Jerusalem, the memory of Israel, has made it into our culture. But on the other hand, we can look at the prophet Jeremiah, who is writing or declaring the word of God to the people who are exiled. And what should you do? You should build houses, live in them, plant gardens, eat their fruits. You should take wives and beget sons. And presumably he's talking about wives, local wives, not Babylonian wives. And you should take wives for your sons and multiply there. Do not decrease. Live on. The idea of planting gardens, eating their food, that's a long-term strategy to live there. Expect to keep living there. And seek the welfare of the city which I have exiled you. It's Babylon. It's the capital of the city, the capital of the country that destroyed Israel. Seek the welfare of that city. So we do have this idea of trying to find a way to live in exile. And I don't know if we have too much time to dwell on this next part, but which is also fascinating. When I say that we have this part from the Babylonian Talmud. We'll talk about Rabbi Zeira, living in Babylon, was avoiding seeing by his teacher, Rav Yehuda, as Rabbi Zeira sought to ascend to Eretz Israel. Right? Ascend, literally to make aliyah, right? And that's a very ancient phrase to talk about going to Israel as making an aliyah, as ascending. But Rav Yehuda is saying, anyone who ascends from Babylon to Eretz Israel transgress a positive mitzvah. You're not supposed to. We were exiled. We're supposed to stay. It is stated they shall be taken to Babylon, and this is a quote from Jeremiah, they shall be taken to Babylonia, and there they shall remain until the day that I record them, said the Lord. So Rabbi Huda is saying this is a commandment for us to stay. Now, actually in context, this verse talks about the instrument of the temple that were brought up with the exodus. It does not talk about the people. Saying whatever was taken from the temple will go back when God decides it's time to be a second temple in this case. But this all leads up to, weirdly enough, the pro-Aliyah, Rabbi Zeira, is the one that quotes one of the most things that has been cited as by anti-Zionist Jews as a reason against Aliyah. And I'm not going to go into all the details of the Midrash. It's from the Song of Songs. There are 3 times where there are oaths, where the oaths, O-A-T-H-S, where someone's swearing an oath to someone, and Rabbi Yehuda is reading those as an oath to not make Aliyah at all. Rabbi Zeira has a different explanation. He says there are 3 oaths. One, the Jews should not ascend to Eretz Israel as a wall, but little by little. So as a wall, think of the image of maybe all the Jews linking hands together, like a living wall, and going all together to the land of Israel. And another one, that the Holy One, blessed be He, adjured the Jews that they should not rebel against the rules of the nation of the world. Again, this idea from Jeremiah. As for the peace of the kingdom you were exiled to. And the last one is that the Holy One, blessed be He, adjured the nations of the world that they should not subjugate the Jews excessively. And that word excessively is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It's not that they should not subjugate the Jews, is that it shouldn't be excessive. And what exactly is excessive could be a matter of debate. So I do want to hear some thoughts about what do these 3 laws mean? And I see Russell is raising his hand. Go ahead, you just need to unmute.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Going back to Psalm 137, Psalm 137 starts out as this, lovely longing for the homeland, but it ends up essentially with a call for jihad.
Yeah.
Basically saying, okay, take all of that nostalgia and use it to essentially destroy the Babylonians. Give them everything they've given us and worse. And I think, by my reading, the thing that strikes me on reading at this time is when the tormentors say, sing to us one of the songs of Zion, and they say, how can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? As if any song of Zion is necessarily a song of the Lord. So that, coupled with the call for holy war against, to me, suggests that this is literally nothing but a statement of religious extremism. The second of the 2 readings is a call for moderation. It seems to be more of a secular, the idea that we can and should live in coexistence. And the third is somewhere in between. I'm talking about, yes, we should aspire to make Aliyah, but this has to be done, every person at their own time in their own way. This isn't it's meant to be a spiritual Aliyah. It's not meant to be a political or, geographical or geopolitical Aliyah. It may be that those are the 3 currents that you are identifying in the Declaration of Independence as well.
Yes, we definitely have that. Now, there is this last part is important. There's a reason we included it. There's also written, at least I didn't read it out, because it is very hard for modern ears to read. One way that we can read it is, a blessing on him who repays you in kind. Not we will repay you in kind, but somebody will. And maybe God will. Maybe, as we know historically, Persians, the kingdom of Persia, defeated the Babylonians, and maybe the kingdom of Persia driven on by God. So, but yes, that is a very hard and violent thing to read.
Trish?
The statement about, or the suggestion, don't come as a wall, but little by little, flashed me immediately back to the beginning of our session, where the invitation to the declaration was supposed to be a secret, and then a wall of people showed up. It's supposed to keep things down on a down low, and instead it's like, nope, we're here, we're coming, you can't stop us. So I think that was, I don't know what the intention of the original statement was, why they should come back little by little, but the more things change, the more things stay the same.
For me, one of the learnings that emerges that I hope you're beginning to feel as well is the importance of complexifying and complicating and nuancing rather than dealing in kind of binaries or either ors. This is in order really to understand not just the text, but the contexts, plural, of the Declaration of Independence, or quite frankly, any sacred foundational document, is to realize how dangerous it is, how much of a distortion it is to simplify them. The attitudes towards the land of Israel have never been uniform. It's not only now in 2024, it wasn't only in 1948. It's really been throughout Jewish time that there have been multiple narratives, multiple conflicting narratives within the Jewish people and outside of the Jewish people in relationship to the land of Israel. And hopefully part of what happens in the course of learning, in this case, about the Declaration of Independence, is that we kind of recognize these and respect these multiple narratives and perspectives. That no, the voice of Aliyah has never been univocal. It's never been a single voice. All the Jews should make Aliyah. There are individuals who have said that. It's also, as Noam pointed out, really since the Babylonian exile, which is give or take 586 before the Common Era, so 2,500 plus years ago, that since then there have been viable diasporic communities. And there are those to this day who, Shaul Magid is one of the names, if you've ever read anything by him, who is now at Dartmouth, prior to that at Michigan and Columbia, JTS, et cetera, Jewish Theological Seminary, writes a lot about the extent to which the Jews are fundamentally a diasporic people, not a people born in Israel and to remain in Israel. So it's, from my perspective, it's wonderful to have these multiple narratives. And hopefully there's a sense of both appreciation for the multiplicity, as well as a recognition, each one of us is entitled to our own narrative, but we need to recognize the Declaration of Independence in many ways is the personal narrative of David Ben-Gurion, his choice of excerpting elements from the Jewish past and his understanding of his own life. And you don't see here, by the way, Judaism. There's nothing about the dat Moshe Yisrael as the religion or the faith of Israel. This is really all about the people of Israel. And one of the reasons that there's been a great tension between Reform Judaism and Israel over the course of their coexistence, basically in many ways, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but in the late 19th century, there was a choice made. Are we primarily a dat, a religious community, a faith community, or are we primarily an am, a people with a language and a land? And Isaac Mayer Wise said, we're a dot. And he called the people about whom we are going to be reading crazy. And that actually called them other things that were much more colorful than that. Messianic, crazy, idiots. And at the same time, Herzl was saying, we really are going to now emphasize and lean into ourselves as a people. And I submit to you that even in 2024, this is an issue within the reform movement, within Zionist circles as well, about how can we somehow manage to be both. And I admit, I don't know if this is Noam's motivation as well for studying this document, but for me, I think one of the important reasons for liberal Jews to study the document like this is to begin or to further come to terms with the extent to which we are not only a religious community, but we're also a people. And how can we be both at the same time?
Yes, definitely. And part of the motivation for me is we are seeing now in the world a rise in anti-Semitism and a rise in anti-Zionism. And the ways that those two things relate and go along with each other is one of the things we want to take a look at, and take a look at some of the foundations of where Zionism came from. And speaking of which, I will go up, and I did make a mistake of not repeating this part in our source text, but I'm gonna go back to the third paragraph here. So Jews in every successive generation strove to re-establish themselves in their ancient homeland. In recent decades, they return in their masses. So they were always strove, they always wanted to, but in recent decades, they started coming back en masse. And another way to say coming back en masse is they came back as a wall. Right? In a lot of ways, this is the exact thing that those three oaths were supposedly against. And this passage of the Talmud, which is sort of colloquially known as the three oaths, in Hebrew, Shlosh HaShavuot, is one of the most cited by anti-Zionist Jews, especially ones who are more traditional, more orthodox. So the members of Satmar, for example, who we see in anti-Zionist demonstration, they often cite that passage. And so the way Zionists respond to this, why is it all of a sudden okay to come back en masse and to, yes, try and push for the end, to reestablish a Jewish presence? Well, there are some secular Jews who would just basically say, we don't care. We just don't believe in that anymore. Okay, that's one aspect. Other religious, and especially modern Orthodox Zionist Jews, pointed to the last of that the nations of the world should not subjugate the Jews excessively, and saying the nations of the world broke that. They broke that historically. They have subjugated the Jews. They broke it at the end of the 19th century with anti-Semitic laws in Russia, and they especially broke it in the Holocaust. So, and a third, which is somewhere in between, saying that the whole idea of the three oaths is waiting until we have God's permission to come back. And what some people are claiming is the very success of the Zionist project and of Israel shows that we do have God's blessing. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there, right? So maybe if we didn't have God's blessing, we won't do it. But the fact that we're able to do it shows we have God's blessing. Okay, but that is again part of the tension we will talk about. We do see here what they list as the main accomplishments. So just the very fact that people are coming back, making the desert bloom. So reestablishing agriculture in areas that weren't agriculturally viable, reviving the Hebrew language, which was a language of prayer and scholarship for most of this time, but reviving it as a living languages, building villages and town, and bringing the blessing of progress to all the country's inhabitants. It's important. Not just the Jews, all the country's inhabitants. So, because this is talking about the beginning of modern Zionism, we're going to spend the next session. As Russell mentioned, this does not start with sort of the universal justification of Jews coming back. That's going to be in the next session. We're going to talk where the text itself is going to talk about some of the more recent and more maybe legalistic reasons that the Jews deserve their own state, and talk a little bit about the history of how the Zionist movement came about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. That was really beautiful and compelling, Noam. So just to mention a couple of the documents, if you wish to consider something prior to our session next week, the Balfour Declaration you may have heard of, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. We may also take a look at the Peel Commission, and perhaps finally the Partition Plan in 1947. All of these were documents that ultimately led to, as Noah mentioned, the legal justification, I would say the global sanction, if you will, for Israel being able to declare its sovereignty, because we hope have already tried to make clear, in addition to telling our story internally, we also are looking for the people who created the declaration are looking for other pieces of the puzzle, other evidences that Israel indeed is not only this timeless connection of the Jewish people, but now is precisely the time that it needs to be created, given the historical context in the world. I want to thank you all for your engagement in this initial session and look forward to the next three. We wish you also a Shabbat Shalom a little bit early.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.